Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this announcement that I think is going to really make a difference in how we tackle domestic violence in this city. My name is Inspector Cliff O'Brien. I'm in charge of our major crime section, which includes our domestic conflict unit here in the Calgary Police Service. As you know, these issues around domestic violence are complex. So there's not one easy solution. There's not one easy response. But what we know from the Calgary Police Service perspective is that this societal issue takes multiple agencies and partners and communities to address. And that being said, I'm very, very pleased to be joined here today by representatives of some of those partners who have dedicated their time and their resources to this project in preventing domestic violence, but also in, unfortunately, in the aftermath of what happens if we are not able to intervene and prevent the violence. So on the stage, we have Kevin McNichol, who's the Executive Director of HomeFront. In the audience, we have Linda Erickson, as well as Bev Fournier from Alberta Human Services, and Karen Olivier, the Executive Director of Closer to Home. And I have to tell you that without these partners, without the people that are here, without those organizations, the successes that you're going to hear about today would not have ever taken place. The police service has a role, certainly, but this is a unique program, and without the help of those organizations, we would have an escalation in domestic violence in many of these situations. So. We also have as a special guest here today, we have Wafa, who is a survivor of domestic violence, who has bravely offered to share her very compelling story a little bit later on this morning, so you're going to hear from her. You know, I have to say from a police perspective, unfortunately, Wafa is one of many Calgarians that suffer from some form of domestic violence in this city. As a police service, we're continuously looking for ways to improve and to use the appropriate resources and to intervene. And in 2009, we became involved in a pilot project aimed at identifying individuals at risk of domestic violence. These aren't necessarily people that have already committed domestic violence, but these are people that are at high risk of committing domestic violence. And this pilot project aimed at offering them support and guidance before the situation escalated. With funding from Safe Community Innovation Fund, a partnership was formed between the Calgary Police Service, HomeFront, Closer to Home, and Alberta Child and Family Services. By working in this partnership, the Domestic Conflict Response Team, or DCRT, was able to intervene in those high-risk domestic conflict cases and offer assistance before the courts got involved, and in many cases before domestic violence even took place. The team focuses on domestic conflict situations where no charges have been laid, but the case is considered chronic or high risk with repeat or perhaps escalating threats of violence. So to put this in perspective, here's what happened from a police perspective. We would show up to calls, and we would show up to repeat calls at the same house with the same family. And although there was not a criminal offense, perhaps, or we didn't have charges to be laid, we knew, and as police officers, we would leave those houses and we would go, if something's not done, somebody's going to die. And until this pilot project and until the Domestic Conflict Response Team came into play, we really didn't really have the tools in place to deal with those families. So I'm very pleased today to say that the successful pilot in those selected communities of the Domestic Conflict Response Team, it's been very successful. And so what we're announcing today is that we're looking to expand the project citywide. We expect these new teams to be in place citywide in all of our districts within the next few weeks. And I just, for the members of the team that are here, I just want to tell you how appreciative we are as partnerships of the work that goes on and the work that you do in intervening early and preventing violence and preventing people, frankly, from being murdered because of domestic violence. So thank you to the team. I'll now hand it over to Kevin McNichol from HomeFront.
My name's Kevin McNichol. I'm the Executive Director of HomeFront, and as Cliff talked about, HomeFront, one of our primary roles is not only victim services connected to the justice process for domestic violence victims, but it's also helping the community coordinate and drive initiatives that are going to help take us from a city that I think really has a crisis around domestic violence to being one that doesn't face this issue. And this program, and what's so exciting about this, it really is the culmination, as Cliff talked about, of 4 years of hard work and partners that committed to that, and the struggles that we went through to get to this point, and to prove the success of what we were able to do is really nothing short of remarkable, and a testament. We've talked a lot this summer about the resiliency inside this city, and I think these services and our willingness to engage on this difficult issue is a further reflection of that resiliency. We've had great partnerships. Those partnerships work in team. We know that this issue is complex, and a complex issue requires a complex solution. And so Cliff talked about the pairings of a social worker and an intervention service like the police and child and family services, going into the community and working with these families in their home following that 911 call. And we're of the firm belief that one call for help is all that's required, and we as a community really need to come forward and engage these families to make a difference in their lives and prevent future acts of violence. One of the things we know about many of these homes is we, as Cliff talked about, don't go once. We often are going 2, 3, and sometimes upwards of 12 to 15 times in a single year. And if we don't do that, the long-term impact on children, the long-term impact on our employment and the economic situation, the long-term impact on our victims and our social services is tremendous. Some of those impacts that we were able to measure is 83% of these homes that we engaged with reported a reduction or a complete absence of future violence within them. This is remarkable. 91% of the victims that we interviewed following these incidents reported that they had no further conflicts in their home. And remember what I said earlier, we were going back to these homes time and time again, and now with the interventions we were able to put in place, we've made that shift, and they are no longer coming into our systems, child and family services or the police services, requiring those assistances. Freeing up, the measures that we were able to measure from an economic and a work perspective, we were able to put 1,500 hours back into the districts, the police districts, for frontline officers to engage in other types of crime or other types of social disorder. This is a tremendous impact for our community. So that's all a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Some of you, I recognize a few faces, were here 4 years ago when we launched, and we had a client who also spoke at that press conference named Carmen. And Carmen's story, sadly, is she had a daughter who was developmentally delayed, fairly well functioning. If you met the daughter in the community, you wouldn't necessarily know that there was something significantly wrong. However, there was lots wrong. Daughter was really finding herself into many domestic relationships, really struggling with that. Mom was at her wit's end about how do we engage with this young person and get her connected with the social supports and services that she requires. And the daughter was highly resistant to the point of being aggressive often with the service providers that did try to engage. And many of them had sort of wiped their hands of this case and we're sort of waiting for something awful to happen. Fortunately, for this family, the DCRT happened. The daughter was involved in a domestic incident with her then boyfriend. The DCRT screened the file and came on board. And when we came on board, the police service saying, look, we've been dealing with this woman for years and years. Child and Family Services, the same thing. Good luck, you're not going to be able to do it. It was 2 door knocks, 2 visits and 2 door knocks, and the door eventually opened, and we were able to engage with that young lady and engage mom. And I can report 4 years later that she's had no further incidents in terms of involving the major systems, and is engaged in counseling and support services that are critical to her. We've been able to find housing. She's a very difficult individual to house. And now she's in a stable place, and mom continually talks to us and tells us what a wonderful change that's happened in her life, and that her daughter is now safe. That's what that 91% reduction in conflict, that's what the 83% reduction in reported violence incidents to Child and Family Services and police services mean in the real world. We're saving lives, we're moving people to healthy places, and that's all to the great team that's behind us and the partnerships that are there. So this is us stepping forward and as Homefront and coming into the community and saying we are willing to take on this challenge. And my request would be that we as a community, as we've risen up and shown our resilience, also rise up and be resilient around this major issue. 16,000 calls a year go into the police service on this topic, and that really is a massive problem. But it's one that we can do something about. And I really invite you to join with us in making a difference. You can do that by volunteering with some of the agencies. You can do that by donating to agencies that support these victims. You can do that by having a conversation with your children about what a healthy relationship is. Whatever you do, please stand up and make a choice and do something. We've been able to demonstrate by doing something you can make a difference, and I invite you to do the same thing. On that note, I'd like to pass it back to Cliff and to wrap us up.
Thanks, Kevin. What I'll do now is I'll just actually just open it up to any questions that you may have, and then shortly after that, we'll make arrangements so that you can talk to WAFA. I think I think one of the things that it did was it certainly showed that there are a lot of families out there that are in need of help and wanting help, and either didn't know where to go or didn't know how to access that help. I think for us that was surprising, and certainly those families that have opened the doors and answered the door knock, we've seen that really from their own stories that there's been tremendous success.
Has domestic violence gone down since the launch 4 years ago?
You know, I would say one of the issues with domestic violence is that it's still underreported. We know that there's still homes out there, and there's still people out there that are suffering from domestic violence. And as we say, and as Kevin just said, we need people to phone us. We need people to step up and be counted and to deal with that. So, you know, we can talk about statistics when it comes to domestic violence. I don't know that the statistics themselves tell the whole story. We continue to see an increase in domestic violence. We also have an increase in population. I think what's more important is that we need to reach those people and prevent domestic violence from happening. When those families are in crisis and they need assistance, we need somebody in the community, and we're proposing that this team right now is doing that, and we'll expand and continue to do that throughout the city, but we need to intervene early before it becomes domestic violence.
As call volumes go, where is domestic violence on the list?
In compared to other calls?
Yes.
It would be up there. I don't have the exact stats. It would.
Majority of your work, though.
It would be a very significant part of the work for sure. We have a very robust definition of domestic conflict. So when we talk about 16,000 calls, those are 16,000 domestic conflict calls, which can be anything from domestic violence to brother and sister arguing. And we go to those and we'll track those, and that comprises those 16,000 calls. In 2002, we had approximately 3,500 criminal offenses that took place in relation to domestic calls. So those are going to be charges, people that are charged. But again, this is all about prevention. We can, the police can show up afterwards, and we're pretty good about showing up and charging people and taking them to jail. We know how to do that. What we really needed was a partnership, and we've seen this over the pilot, of how do we work with the social workers, how do we work with our community partners to actually prevent it before it gets there.